Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Cyber Dragons, and I suppose we only just really did a Cyber Dragon deck profile, but that was before we got the new stuff, and we have a lot of new stuff. Now, the skill is exactly the same, but it has been changed ever so slightly. So this skill can be used if all the monsters in your deck are machine-type monsters, and the deck contains no level 7 monsters. So already we're locked into just machines, which is quite a harsh restriction, but the deck is pretty strong, so it does make sense. Requirement from turn 2 onwards, we can choose one face-up monster on your field with 2100 or 2400 attack. That's going to be one of our Cyber Dragon boss monsters or Cyber Dragon itself. It gains 500 attack, so it will go up to 26 or 29 until the end of this turn. You can shuffle one card from your hand into the deck, and if you do, we can add Proto Cyber Dragon or Fusion from your deck or graveyard to your hand each card once per duel. So this is pretty cool. Because we can get it from graveyard or from deck, that does make it a little bit more versatile. If all of them are in the graveyard, for example, we can recycle them, but we can only get each one once. Quite often, we actually ended up using the skill to kind of fix our hand or to get an extra body out, and we didn't end up actually using the Proto Cyber Dragon to fuse, and that seemed to work out pretty well for us. One other thing I should probably mention is that we did actually get second place in a tournament with this deck, so it was performing quite well, and I feel like we have at least a bit of experience with the deck now. So I don't want to say we've mastered the deck because we most certainly haven't, but we do now have a little bit more experience under our belt. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Ancient Gear Golem. Now this is a bit of a weird one. Ancient Gear Golem is a card that I didn't actually summon very often, and quite often I would use the skill and get rid of Ancient Gear Golem just because 2 tributes is quite a lot. But the few times we did summon this card, it was extraordinarily valuable. If we're able to use this as a finisher, we can use it to push through negate attack and buffered slime, which is so powerful. Being able to have a 3000 piercing body that doesn't let your opponent's trap card stop it is really cool, and not many decks can actually play this card, and this is one of the few that can take advantage of it. Now again, a lot of the time, Golem's going to be a bit of a brick, but when it does come in clutch, it really comes in clutch. One other thing to note about this card is it does have 3000 defense, so if we tribute set this card, there is not an actual ton of things that can clear this. Against the Cyber Dragon mirror, typically they won't be able to out this unless they go into exactly Cyber End Dragon. So the next boss monster we'll talk about is Cyber Assault Dragon. So 2400 attack, 1800 defense. We can tribute summon this card in attack position by tributing one face-up Cyber Dragon. So notably that's Cyber Dragon or Proto Cyber Dragon. We can place a Cyber Dragon from your graveyard on top of your deck, so this has to be an actual Cyber Dragon. Then we can destroy one face-up level 8 or lower monster with 2400 or higher attack on your opponent's field. So the times we've actually found the most use of this is actually in the mirror. Cyber Assault Dragon can pop Cyber Assault Dragon, and it can also pop Cyber Twin Dragon, because this is a level 8 monster that has more than 2400 attack. So really good card in specific matchups. When we did play this against the new Seven's Road Fusion deck, it doesn't literally do anything. No card in that deck is a valid target for Cyber Assault Dragon, which means sometimes this card is basically just a vanilla that you can boost up to 29, but that in itself is still not too bad. Cyber Assault is powerful in the right matchup, but like we say, sometimes it can just be useless. And then there's Cyber Search Dragon, our other boss. So this one is also pretty cool. We can tribute summon this card in attack position by tributing a Cyber Dragon, so exactly the same. During the main phase that you normal or special summon this card, you can place one card from your hand on top of your deck to special summon one Cyber Dragon from your graveyard face up to your field. And again, this has to be a regular Cyber Dragon. So this is pretty good to extend, right? We basically do get the Cyber Dragon out, but because we lose a card from our hand, we are basically going even on advantage, right? We basically treat the card in our hand as a special summon Cyber Dragon onto the field, whereas if we use Cyber Assault, it's basically a free -1 to your opponent, because we don't lose any advantage, but our opponent does lose a guy. And if it's a high investment guy like Cyber Twin Dragon or a double tribute boss monster, then that's even added value from that. But Cyber Search Dragon is still really good to go wide. It can also enable fusions, because obviously we get back a Cyber Dragon. We have, let's say, a Proto Cyber Dragon. We can combine them together and make a Cyber Twin. So Cyber Search Dragon is still really good. And because of the skill, we can also get away with having quite a few high-level monsters in the deck, because again, we can fix our hand if we need to. Next up, Cyber Dragon itself. So Cyber Dragon is a really cool boss monster. Having 2100 attack can be super relevant. Just being able to cheat this out with something like a Cyber Entry or something like the Cyber Search is going to be really good. The only downside is sometimes you'll open multiple in your opening hand and just be unable to really do anything. We did have a couple of games where our turn 1 was very weak. It was either like set 1 monster, or in one game we literally passed the first turn because we really didn't have anything to go for. So we just kind of hoped our opponent couldn't kill us. They couldn't, and then we managed to win on the crackback. But Cyber Dragon is still really, really strong. It just can get a little bit awkward at times. Then there's Proto Cyber Dragon, obviously necessary for the skill. Also very, very strong card because we can use it to make our fusions. And we can also tribute it to get out our Assault and our Cyber Search. But one other thing we can do with it is bring it back with Cyber Entry, and this does come up quite a bit. It's actually quite interesting that Cyber Entry, I think, is the only Cyber Dragon card that actually mentions Proto Cyber Dragon. Pretty much all the rest of the cards mean you just have to have a Cyber Dragon. If Cyber Search Dragon, for example, could get back a Proto, that would be absolutely fantastic, but it can't. So Proto Cyber Dragon is basically a really important combo piece for the deck. Then we have Ultimate Flag Beast Boltracorn, and it's a really cool card. And it's obviously very, very powerful staple, but it does sometimes interfere with the overall game plan because it needs to be our only monster on the field. And Cyber Dragon, to special summon it, you need to have no monsters on the field. So these cards kind of do conflict with each other a little bit. But quite often we've still been able to use Boltracorn to some quite good effect. We summon it, turn off our opponent's back row. Then, for example, we could summon out a Proto, then activate Cyber Entry, then activate the Fusion, go into the Cyber Twin, etc., etc. So there is still some really good plays you can make with this card. And worst case scenario, it's just a 1200 guy that you're going to sack off and it's completely fine. Then we have the Assault Cannon, and we are on 3 copies of this card for a few reasons. First off, it allows us to clear over 3,000 attack monsters. Now that doesn't come up too often, but there is, for example, Blue Eyes White Dragon, there is Ancient Gear Golem, and there is the brand new Hyper Strike Dragon Dragia Star F. And if, for example, we summon out a Cyber Search, we can boost up to 29, but we can't quite finish it off. So Assault Cannon is really good to clear that out, as well as if we summon out a Cyber Dragon, boost up to 26 with the skill, we can then use Assault Cannon to reduce down by 300, which means these can attack over 28s. And again, we have the Metarions, we have Seven's Paladin, we have Cyber Twin. There are a lot of 28s in the game, so having a way to make the mass go in our favor is really, really powerful. And just having more light machines is also really, really good. One thing I have noticed is Cyber Entry does lock you into only light machines. So having only light machines, in fact the only non-light machine in this deck is actually Ancient Gear Golem, means that Cyber Entry is online more often. I have seen quite a few people play Craft the Drone, and I do think Craft the Drone is still a really good card, but I have been in quite a few situations where I managed to survive the game because they had a Craft the Drone on the field that couldn't attack after they'd used Cyber Entry. So I think if you're specifically using a triple Cyber Entry build like we are, you want as many light machines as possible. And speaking of more light machines, Avant Wolf. Avant Wolf is just 1500 beta, not really much to say about it. It's really good. Just having more attack is always going to be really useful, and this deck is basically an aggressive aggro deck, so you just want to get as much damage in as possible, which is a similar reason to why we're on New Recruit. Worker Warrior New Recruit is obviously not great, but it is a light machine, it is a level 4 or lower, and its attack value can be relevant to close out games. Just having an extra guy with a bit of oomph can be enough. Obviously not ideal, and he will be basically replaced as soon as we get a better light machine to go in that spot, but basically fine. We've been playing with this, and it has come up a few times. For our Legend spell, we are playing Tribute to the Doomed because it's just that good. Losing a card from your hand? Not the best, but we can sometimes make good use of this. For example, we could send a Cyber Dragon to the graveyard, bring it back with Cyber Entry. But being able to pop a monster is always really, really valuable. This deck is another one of those decks that can struggle to out giant guys. If our opponent, for example, gets out a Cyber End Dragon or a Maximum, we're not the best at dealing with it. So Tribute to the Doomed is kind of our answer to that, as well as we can pop face down cards to just get in. Very versatile, very, very powerful. Then we have Cyber Entry, and this, in my opinion, is the star of the deck. So you might be looking at this deck and go, oh, 12 spell traps, that's quite a lot. That's too many. You don't have enough normal summons. Well, Cyber Entry is kind of like an extra normal summon. So you have to squint at it, right? It's not quite. And if you do just open a bunch of Cyber Entries early, you're kind of out of luck, right? But most of the time, we'll see Cyber Entry later into the game. If we get one early, that's fine. We'll set it and that'll be a normal summon for later. But we can basically use these as monsters. So the way I kind of look at this is these 3 slots are other monsters. When you think about it like that, we're only actually playing 9 spell traps, and that is actually a good amount. And that is usually how it plays out. Now, it's not always going to play out that way. Sometimes you will just break. That is a natural part of playing the game. I mean, just look at Psychics. Psychics play 10 spell traps, sometimes 11. They play 4, sometimes 5 boss monsters, and sometimes that deck breaks. But sometimes it pops off. It gets to do all of its crazy stuff and just win the game. And this deck is very similar to that, except the combo lines are extremely, extremely simple in this deck compared to Psychic. I do actually think this deck does have a lot of comparisons to Psychic, but again, it is much, much easier to play. The Cyber Entry absolutely incredible. It can just get out 2100 bodies. It can get out our Cyber Assault Dragons from hand by bringing back either a Proto or a Cyber Dragon. We can bring back the bodies to fuse together. It's just such a versatile and powerful card, and the only drawback is we cannot attack with our Ancient Gear Golem the turn we use it. But activate multiples of these in turn is also something that is quite common. As well as the fact this also will activate our skill, we can use Cyber Entry to bring back a Cyber Dragon. Now we have a valid target for Cybernetic combat customization, which means we can get easy access to Fusion or a Proto Cyber Dragon. Next up, Talismanic Sealer Rate. So ideally, I would like to play more than one copy of this card, but realistically, we just can't fit it in. We already have so many spell traps, but TSA is still really strong. Being able to put more cards back into our deck is obviously good. Recycling is always going to be really useful, but reducing our opponent's attack, again, is super important because we don't deal with maximums and giant guys super well. So TSA is basically the counterpart to our Tribute to the Doomed, and if we don't see either of these, and for example, our opponent drops a turn 1 Drago, it's probably not going to go well for us. Then we have the 2 copies of Fusion. We have 2 copies because we can search one, but we can only search one time. So we kind of want to draw into the other one, and making 2 Cyber Twins is really, really powerful. There was one game during the tournament that actually managed to make double Cyber Twin, which was really, really strong. So Fusion, always going to be an important combo piece. There's not really much more to say about it. Then Barrage of Steel. Popping back pro is good, especially in a deck where you want to go super aggressive and attack multiple times with your Cyber Twin. Getting stuff out of the way is always going to be really powerful. And then our traps don't really need an explanation. We're on Buffered Slime and Negate Attack. Negate Attack over the other 2 because Negate Attack is just really good. There's not really a reason to play Trap Hole over Negate Attack in my opinion. Like right now, it would be like probably exactly Ancient Gear Golem or Jointech Rex. And that's only because those cards basically get to ignore this or pop it. Other than those, Negate Attack is going to be better in pretty much every situation, so I really, really like it. And we don't even need to mention Buffered Slime. There's still tons of level 8 monsters going around, the most prevalent one being Cyber Twin Dragon. So, how does the deck play? The deck plays very awkwardly sometimes. Like I say, sometimes you'll open a hand that's not great. Your turn 1 is typically not very good, but if you go second and you do open the Cyber Dragon, you're usually kind of off to the races. We can play a very aggressive style. We can basically bully most people out of the game a lot of the time. One of this deck's worst matchups is actually probably itself, but that's just because it has all the tools to deal with itself, which is really awkward. Like Cyber Assault beats Cyber Assault, and it beats Ancient Gear Golem, and it beats Cyber Twin. So Cyber Assault is actually really, really valuable just to hold onto. And in the mirror, if I found Cyber Assault early, I would just keep it in my hand until my opponent played a Golem or a Twin or their own Assault, and then I would be able to out it with that. So very, very valuable card. The only real blowout matchup we had against this was in the finals of the tournament. We got completely bodied by Metarion, and that played in a very, very similar way to Magnum Overlord, where they just made one giant guy with too much attack, attacked over us, and got in for all of our life points in one attack. Not really much we can do about that. It was literally have Negate Attack or die. So outside of that, this deck has been very, very reliable, very, very powerful, and very, very popular. But let's fire into some replays so I can show what I've been talking about.